And I think a lot of the world is organized to distract us from ourselves.
Right.
There seems to be more and more distractions in the world, right? More information, more social media platforms, more things to occupy us, anything to take us out of ourselves, where all the beauty and power and healing and fabulousness is. It's deep inside of ourselves. And the philosopher, I'm sure you heard this, Pascal once said, all human misery flows from the fact that us humans cannot sit with ourselves alone in a room.
Hello, beautiful people. On today's podcast, we have Karen Hardwick. Karen is a clinically and spiritually trained psychotherapist turned leadership coach, podcast host, and speaker. She helps people to awaken, courageously lead, and unlock the power of connection in their lives and work. She's the author of the book, The Connected Leader, 7 Strategies to Empower Your True Self and Inspire Others. What I love about this conversation is Karen's absolute presence. As a leader of connection, she shows up in a way that has you feel safe, heard, and seen. This is certainly a vulnerable conversation as we delve into the darkness of connection, how disconnection can fuel distraction, numbing, and addiction, and we explore the theme in the realm of Gabor Mate's work. Stop asking why the addiction and start asking why the pain. Connection is a biological imperative, and this isn't just in relation to us and our surroundings, our relationships with others, but also our relationship with ourselves. And so in knowing this, we discuss how to stop fearing ourselves and start being with who we truly are. Please enjoy this conversation with Karen. Welcome to Be Human, Karen.
Oh, Jenna, I am so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So where I would love to start with you, Karen, is on the theme of connection. And particularly in relation to, I was looking at your social media and you said something that really sparked my curiosity with you. And you sort of spoke about how connection is personally really important to you because you've known the darkness of disconnection. So where I would love to start is to kind of get to know you on more of a personal level in relation to that, and particularly how at that time in your life when you were experiencing that, you kind of learnt to fill the gap of that.
So you really do believe in diving right in, don't you? No small talk for Jenna.
No small talk for Jenna. I know you're ready to meet me here, Karen.
I am. You're my kind of girl. Yeah, darkness of disconnection, for sure. No stranger to that. And I think that's one of the reasons, Jenna, honestly, why I run to healthy connections so powerfully right now. So there's a number of different seasons in my life that were dark, whether they were filled with grief and loss, sometimes abuse and betrayal from relationships, and also the ever weaving in and out theme of addiction in my life. Addiction is something that has surrounded me my whole life.
Yeah.
And for listeners who might have a similar experience, we all know that addiction is a disease of relationships, and it brings us to our knees, whether we're the ones with the substance use disorder or we love someone so fiercely with it. And during those seasons of darkness, when I felt overwhelmed and fearful and grieving, my go-to is always solitude. It's always solitude, which is different from isolation. And I want to be really clear about that. Solitude is a healing kind of a sacred space. And that really fills my cup. It really helps me to hear what's going on inside of me. It really helps me to know who to turn to, who not to turn to.
Right.
And in that time of solitude, I connect really deeply with myself. So whether I was having seasons of darkness as a child, because my mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness when I was very little. And when that happens, it really rattles your complete world because you realize the worst thing can actually happen.
Right.
Like for a child to lose their mother, that is like the worst thing. And so I grew up knowing that the world can sometimes be a really tough place. I mean, life is messy, and then we rise, we do recover, we find our way through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Mm.
I really was interested in asking you this question because when I read it, I really resonated with you because it's something that I've been recently really reflecting on. Is connection's really important to me. Like it's something that's a really big focus of mine. And I was reflecting on why is that? And it was so similar to what you're saying. It was because I've known the
Mm.
darkness of disconnection that I realized how important it is in our lives. And I know that in your book you kind of speak about it's just as important as like food and water and safety. We are wired for connection. Can you sort of share more about how connection's a biological imperative?
Yeah, it's a very evolutionary thing. I mean, our brains are wired to connect. And now there's research that says that our brains are wired to have a transcendent experience.
Wow.
So think about that. I mean, that we are really wired to have some type of spiritual, personal relationship that's different for everybody.
Mm,
And that really marries with my idea of connection, because in my world, connection is the synergistic coming together of three things. And when these three things come together, we do, thank you, God, experience emotional wholeness and relational well being and a sense of spiritual strength. But we need these three things, not perfectly, because connection is a lifetime journey. I mean, you know that, Jennah, right? You love
right.
this topic too.
Yeah.
But the three things are self connection. We cannot lead or connect to others until we connect with ourselves. Right? And then the
Right.
second is discovering for whatever works for each person some type of higher purpose. Why am I here in human school? What am I supposed to be doing? Why, what will my legacy be? What's my purpose? That's a spiritual connection. And then we can really lean into those shared experiences with other people. And we don't have to do any of this perfectly. It's progress, not perfection.
Mm,
Yeah. And we are wired. There is the vagus nerve goes from our brain into our bodies, and it sends signals back and forth from the brain to our body. Are we safe? Do we feel threatened? And when we feel safe, we're able to connect. And when we feel threatened, whether we are or not, we still feel that way. We shut down. And so we do heal in safe, psychologically open and sacred places, and we need relationships and connections to heal. So it's very complex, and yet it's easy in many ways.
yeah. And
Mm.
I know that sort of you speak to be able to sort of flourish and connect with others, it starts with going within. And I always find this so interesting because throughout my life, like in everything that I've reflected on in my experiences, this sense of safety is sometimes difficult when you don't even feel safe within your own body and you don't even
Oh,
sort of trust
yes.
yourself. And you
Amen.
haven't taken the time to develop that trust with yourself. How is it that you have in your life and that you share with leaders about not being afraid to start developing that relationship with yourself?
Mm. Yeah, that's a scary place to be with ourselves.
Mm,
And I think a lot of the world is organized to distract us from ourselves.
right.
There seems to be more and more distractions in the world, right? More information, more social media platforms, more things to occupy us, anything to take us out of ourselves, where all the beauty and power and healing and fabulousness is. It's deep inside of ourselves. And the philosopher, sure you heard this, Pascal once said, all human misery flows from the fact that us humans cannot sit with ourselves alone in a room.
Mm.
When we have the courage to do that, whether it be starting with 5 minutes a day or moving into longer periods of silence and solitude, when we start to do that, we start to hear the power of our own thoughts. We start to feel our emotions. This is a scary place to be,
Yeah.
right? Especially when so many of us, I'll raise my hand to this, spent so many moons like hustling for approval and
Right.
looking for that outside validation. And is
Yeah.
there another trophy? Can I get another degree? Is there another title? Is there another raise? Oh, another byline? Awesome. And it's just right. It's just not to say that any of those things are bad in and of themselves. They're not. But if they become our reason for being,
Mm.
to numb ourselves, we are in an addictive process.
It reminds me of a part in your book, and you speak about being an emotionally healthy person. Can you share more about how one can begin to have a healthy relationship with those emotions that you kind of speak to that can be quite frightening in the moment?
Mhm. So I'm really careful not to make this sound like, hey, there's 3 easy steps and you too can be
Yeah.
emotionally connected, right?
Right, right.
That we
Yeah.
really want to
Preaching
stay
to the
away from
choir.
those. That's right. So it's a process, and people kind of
Yes.
roll their eyes when I say that. They want
The
it to
quick
be a
fix.
microwave, and instead I say connection is a slow cooker.
Mm.
Okay. This is a slow process. So when I work with people and with myself, I say to them all the time, just start by identifying, accepting how you might feel. Don't judge it. Don't push it away. Don't try to figure it out. Don't try to solve it. Just could you possibly identify the feeling? Is it sadness? Is it fear? Is it grief? Anger? What's underneath it? And just say to yourself, it's okay to feel this. Like
Mm.
it sounds so primitive and it sounds so basic, but so many people in the C suite, in boardrooms, people who are talented and successful and doing all the things are not able to allow themselves to accept their feeling. And that's when I believe people start acting things out, leaking out, lashing out, and unaware of how they land on other people.
Yeah.
So I like that basic place of just becoming aware and then accepting feelings. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think it's a beautiful, powerful first step because I really relate to this because I know certainly before I kind of did self-development work, it was like at any point that I felt some form of uncomfortable emotion, I would try and suppress it. I would judge myself. I would be frustrated with myself. I would
Right.
think that something's wrong. And just that power of just being able to sit and just accept how you're feeling can be so
Right.
transformational. Yeah.
And when we don't sit with it, we wind up trying to resist it, which could lead into the numbing of it. And
Right.
there's so many different ways to numb it. I mean, surely drugs and alcohol, everybody likes it. Yeah, those addicts over there, those alcoholics over there, they're the ones with
Right.
the problem. But I like to invite people to think we all do our fair share of numbing.
Yeah.
Is it too
Absolutely.
much work? Is it too much exercise? Is it too much
Mm-hmm.
shopping? All those process addictions, gambling. Now we have social media. That whole physical scrolling has been shown to be
Right.
addictive in our brains. And then we have the things that people don't like to talk about, but they're really a issue. They're commonplace in our society. Porn, internet,
Mm-hmm.
sex, all those things that take people out of themselves and then create a bevy of more shame, more
Right.
guilt. All right. So now we
Yeah.
have to numb ourselves more. So it's this cycle until we can slow that down and look beneath the waterline.
Yeah, I find that so interesting because it is almost that illusion of separation, isn't it? It's like if you see, a quote unquote like drug addict on the street, don't think that you're any different to them when you go home and you eat your food and you watch your Netflix while scrolling on social media. It's just a different way of numbing, but it's still numbing. It's still not addressing your emotional experience of life. And I think it's so important to acknowledge that, because even you suggest like people experience shame about certain decisions that you make. And I just don't think we should have a hierarchy of what's a better outlet than the other. I don't think that's the conversation we should be having. I think it should be more, why are we numbing ourselves versus I'm going to judge the person over there that's numbing in a different way that I think is socially acceptable.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Mm.
Yeah, 100% to all of that. You know, Gabor Mate in his book, The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, says this beautiful thing. He says we shouldn't be asking, let me get this right. We shouldn't be asking why the addiction. The right question is, why the pain?
Yeah.
And in some ways, and I say this tongue in cheek, but it's true though, given what you just said, recovering and not recovering addicts and alcoholics wear their pain on their sleeve. We can all see that. I'm in recovery, so I'm really familiar with this. The rest of us are still bozos on the bus. We just might be a little bit, more adept at hiding
Yeah.
that level of pain. And so many of us human beings, I asked a recovery specialist a few weeks ago, did he agree with the fact that 80% of all adults are experiencing some kind of trauma? And he said, yes, and I would up it to 100%.
Wow.
Because trauma is not just about those of us who have survived an earthquake or some terrible sexual nightmare, trauma, abuse. Trauma can be for somebody who was bullied in school for a year. It can be for a child who had to leave friends and move across country with his family. There's so many different ways of identifying and defining trauma. So, yeah.
So I want to explore being a spiritually healthy person with you, because I think in my life, what I've learned is that developing a belief that I am part of the whole has been really helpful for me. And I know that you sort of talk about, I actually liked this sentence that you wrote. It was sort of being able to experience oneness with the larger world, recognizing we are more similar than different, connected more than separate. Can you share more about your experience with this oneness, how that sort of represents for you, and how you've seen in other people's lives that can be quite supportive, helpful, a sense of truth that kind of helps people to develop that sense of purpose in life?
So thank you for bringing that up, Jennah. I'm glad it resonated with you. So I think we have a lot of defense mechanisms, we humans, to keep ourselves separate. Self-righteousness, judgment, arrogance, criticism, thinking we went to a better school, thinking we live in a better neighborhood, all those things that in some way are these emotional pats on the back we give ourselves. Like, you're good, you're okay, right?
Yeah.
And it's usually as a result of feeling like we have to compare ourselves or we're in competition. And those are all really separating kinds of dynamics. It's designed to help us feel safe because we have so many insecurities, regardless, again, of our level of success. And yet what it does is it doesn't make us feel safe. It makes us feel more and more a part of. And so when we can sit in a room and send compassion in our heads and our hearts to somebody who might be expressing a different opinion, it moves us out of judgment and into this sense that we are all in this together. I do that oftentimes in meetings, whether I'm in a 12-step meeting or in a boardroom meeting. If someone's getting under my skin, I mean, it happens, right? I'm like, what are
Yeah.
they talking about, right? Right? Why are they saying that? I go through this mental exercise I have of this is really important to them. They're speaking
Mm,
from their heart. This is about their experience. And all of a sudden I'm sending them compassion, and I feel my own compassion for myself and
mm.
them kick in. And it's a cool tool for me to remind myself that really, again, like as I said before, we're all bozos on the bus. We're all just trying to figure this out. And
Yeah.
when we can come at it from a place of gratitude and remember our own mistakes and our own missteps and how we too harm people, it really helps us to feel a very kind of loving humility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the humor in that. I read recently, I forget the first part, but it made me giggle. It was a quote by a man called Naval Ravikant, and he said something like, you know, don't think that you're so significant, you're just a monkey with a plan. And I thought that was really funny. Yeah, I was just like, oh, that's so true. We're just a monkey with a plan. It
Yeah,
just,
absolutely.
yeah, it's just like, I think, as you're suggesting, it's just like, um, I mean, it humanized it for me in a sense, even though he uses a monkey as an example, but it just made me laugh and just lighten up and be like, gosh, like, yeah, like, don't be so judgmental of people. Don't be so judgmental of yourself. Like, we're all just here trying our best to live our best life. And we don't know how to do that the way that we always need to. But as you're suggesting, it's, whatever we speak to or how we behave is always what's true to us in that moment. And I think we always need to recognize that.
Right. And even when we make a mistake or we
Yeah.
hurt somebody or hurt ourselves, it's because we're acting out of some kind of unresolved pain. So
Mm.
just last week, I apologized to two of my team members because I had gotten caught up in a situation that really triggered me.
Wow.
And I had to unpack that and figure. And what I wound up saying to these two really beautiful, valued team members was not only am I sorry, but it really humbled me to realize that I have still so much work to do, that
Yeah.
I got so caught up in this other kind of crazy drama that I wasn't able to maintain my footing. And when we get those messages, I think it's just a matter of learning, okay, the kryptonite is still there.
Yeah.
I have to be really super aware of myself at all times and give myself crazy amounts of grace
Mm.
when I make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then also figure out, can I avoid this mistake again? And what do I need to do to make amends to anyone that was hurt in that process?
Thank you for sharing that, because it's actually a conversation I had with a podcast guest yesterday, a relationship coach, and she's like, it's a weird experience when people come to you for relationship coaching, but you don't have a great relationship at the moment, or you're having marital problems. And I really respect that you shared that, because I think it's so important for us when we're sort of, leading experts in a certain field to be able to continue to humanize ourselves, that at the end of the day, we are just a monkey with a plan. We are just a human, right? And we're still having these
Yeah.
experiences. So I really honor you in sharing that, because I think, obviously you work with a lot of leaders, and I think leaders tend to put this pressure on themselves. They can't get it wrong. If they are the leader, like, they can't make mistakes. That's not what leaders do. They lead, they don't make mistakes. So I think it's so important. I know it's sort of part of your work, is being able to bring that sense of self-compassion and empathy to the fact that even though things, not always is it going to be like perfect. And I mean, it speaks to what you speak about. I know, Karen, you speak about this like progress over perfection.
Hmm. I think it's really important for us to share our real and raw um, self.
Yeah.
Now, and to do that in a discerning way, because I don't think
Right.
it's helpful when we tell people so many gory details that it misses the message, and the message being, I too am a monkey with a plan. I make a lot, I make a lot of mistakes, and this is how I recover from them. And that's why this work is so important to me, so that I can invite people to be more human and real, so that when we shake the kaleidoscope of our life, the patterns that emerge are self awareness, humility, empathy, instead of shame,
Yeah.
gossip, sabotage, resistance, all those things that keep us separate. And I always invite leaders in the corporate settings too, like, if you shake the kaleidoscope of your organization, what patterns are emerging? And
Interesting.
sometimes it's not very pretty. And what
Yeah.
can we do to change those from a command and control to a human focused culture that still has accountability embedded in it?
Yeah.
We still have to make our numbers. We still have to please shareholders. We still have to do all those things that keep the doors open and the lights on. But how can we do that from a perspective of being human and humble and not always having the answers?
Mm. It's certainly my belief that I think in my own experience of life, shame has probably been my deepest form of suffering. How do you work with people
Mm.
in such a deep, and I would also say such a dark kind of experience?
Yeah, shame is just so heavy
Mm.
and messy, and it shows up in so many ways. It's the belief deep within us that we are not worthy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a mistake.
Mm.
I'm a mistake. I'm so broken. I can never rise up. Um, mm, this is where I believe the power of community really comes in. We
Mm.
don't heal in isolation.
Yeah.
We heal by people holding up a mirror to us in a really loving way and saying, this is how I see you. And
Mm.
this is how I hope you eventually see yourself. I think we all need trusted guides to navigate this journey of shame. People who have walked before us,
Yeah.
people who are honest and who are really digging into their own journeys. Yeah, I'm an Enneagram too. And, in many ways, shame is my constant companion, which is why I've had this hustling for approval and
Yeah.
doing things for other people so that I could gain lovability.
Mm.
And for instance, for me, being thoughtful, I am wired to be thoughtful and empathetic. It is my superpower. But like with any of us, when our superpowers get out of balance, Jennah, that's usually because of shame,
Mm.
that's when it can kind of tilt over into some unhelpful behavior. So I think it's always good to go back to, what do I need to be learning about myself? Who can help me learn this about myself? And how can I dig deep?
Mm. And how can one have a relationship between self-discovery and self-awareness?
Oh, that's one of my favorite distinctions. 95% of all executives surveyed believe they're self-aware. What research is showing is only 10 to 12% are truly self-aware.
Wow.
Okay. So I like to differentiate. I think self-awareness is the ability to truly and honestly list one's strengths and weaknesses.
Mm.
So think of it, if you would, Jennah, as like more of a inventory or a cognitive exercise. Right? It's a spreadsheet. Here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses. People can do that. And then they pretty much think the exercise is over. Like, okay, I'm done. I did that. And I like to say, okay, now the work really begins, because Think of self-discovery as going on an emotional and relational archaeological dig. And we peel away the layers, layer by layer, going deeper and deeper, and we start to see the stuff about ourselves. We start to see how these strengths really are treasures, and we start to see how these weaknesses have caused some harm and woundedness for ourselves and for others. And so this self-discovery process then becomes an acceptance of how we actually move through the world and how we influence and how we hurt people. And then we can move into the really courageous act of changing what we can change. So think of self-awareness as a cognitive exercise that many people don't even do. And then think of self-discovery as something which is a game changer. Like this is
Right.
where we really lean into our potential and we can soar and we can have relationships that, while not perfect, are meaningful and holy and healing.
Mm.
Yeah, because we're true about who we are.
Right. Right. And I think as you've shared, it's so important to be able to do that with someone that can hold that space for you to really put who you are currently on the paper in all of its honesty and truth and vulnerability.
Yeah. And somebody who can help us move from being that fearful, shameful self
Yeah.
to that accountable, empathetic self. Like being accountable is really a step into freedom. When we own our stuff,
Yeah.
things begin to change. And when we don't, our stuff is in the basement, working out with weights, getting stronger, and it's going to win. It's going to take us down if
Yeah.
we don't own it.
Yeah. I love that. It's because someone asked me the other day, what has been the most impactful thing for you in terms of your development? And it was
Mhm.
that accountability and that responsibility. It
Mhm.
was being able to own my shit. There's no more blaming, putting it externally into other people's power. It was, and you speak to this being a sense of freedom. That's truly what it feels like, Karen, is that all of a sudden I went from this person that felt broken and was in that darkness
Mm.
that you speak about to just feeling extremely powerful and finding freedom and being able to, in every moment of my life, take responsibility and be excited about that it's in my power to become aware, to discover, to transform, whatever it is that I so choose, because it's in my power to do so.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you say it so eloquently, and it's not easy. Like
And
when
it's
you
not easy.
right, right? Because
Yes.
when you moved from that position, I'm thinking, Jenna, of the victim, like this is being done
Yes.
to me.
Right.
These people are X, Y, or Z, just fill in the blank.
Mm-hmm.
What happens is, as an adult, now it's different as a child, but as an adult, when we have agency and resources and hopefully support, we can move from that victim to, you know what, I'm going to own every friggin' thing.
Yeah.
I say to my son all the time, who's 20, we have to close the escape hatches. No
Mm.
more scapegoating, no more blaming, no more shaming, no more gossiping. It is on our watch. We
Beautiful.
are in charge of we, right?
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about mistaking busyness for purpose. And I actually want to
Mm.
share a little paragraph that you had in the book in relation to this. You shared, we are a culture that confuses busyness with purpose, social media with connection, Instagram scrolling with therapy and spiritual direction, wealth with well-being, and self-obsession with vulnerability. That's a powerful paragraph for me.
Mm.
There's so much truth in everything that you share. Can you speak more about this confusion with business and purpose? Because this is certainly what I'm finding in the people around me and the clients that I have, is
Mhm.
that they think filling in time should equal meaning and purpose. And then they become surprised when they feel a lack of meaning and purpose and feel unfulfilled, which obviously, as you're aware, Karen, kind of fuels this escapism and numbing because they're confused as to why this is happening. Can you share more about your experience with that and your thoughts on that?
It's always so weird to hear your own words being read out loud. You're like, oh, wow.
Did I say that?
Did I say that?
Profound.
Yes. Or like, oh, I could have said that better. So
yeah. Right? It's always sitting on the shoulder.
Busyness with purpose. If someone just 60 years ago would have said to us, you're going to get a piece of mail every 10 seconds, we would have been unable to grasp that concept. And yet that's what our world is like. And it's not just mail in our inboxes anymore. Remember the days when it was just inboxes? Now it's phones and beeps and texts going off and DMs, and we're constantly on high alert. Our brains are under attack. So my solution to this was to get really serious about a process I call chasing slow. And what that means for me is kicking off the day with probably at least an hour, if not 2 hours of meditation and prayer and mindfulness and journaling and quiet.
Beautiful.
Because if I don't, Jennah, it's way too easy to just get right back onto that conveyor belt.
Yeah.
That just pushes us through the day, checking boxes. And I was just, today was a really, really full dance card. And most of my days are really busy. They are. I try to build in time throughout the day to go for a walk, to slow myself down, to say, Karen, you're not all that. Like, the world is going to keep spinning on its axis. Seriously, it is. Your clients are going to be fine. Your podcast is going, whatever, it's going to be downloaded, people or not. But how can we take ourselves off of that pedestal and realize that it's when we're in the pit that we are more authentic? When we're struggling, when we can lean into grace, when we realize this mistake is really valuable, this is a treasure, that's when we start to realize that all of these activities are just that self-obsession.
Yeah.
And moving to a quieter place, chasing slow, really helps us to realize all that I need is within myself.
Beautiful. Yeah, I had that realization only sort of in the last week. I've been someone that, particularly for the last few years, has really been, and it's served its purpose. I seek externally through books and everything to learn from people. But I realized recently I started wiring my brain to do that more than to ask myself the question first and to look within. So when you mentioned your morning routine of being part of that journaling, I've just started the Julie Cameron's The Artist's Way morning pages, where she suggests writing 3 pages of stream of consciousness, whatever you want to. And if you don't feel like writing, write I don't feel like writing, which I really love. And it's been so helpful, Karen, honestly, just being able to take that morning of no phone, just drink my water, sit down, do these morning pages, and just start exploring, just see what's going on in that mind of yours, and without judgment, without editing. And it's just been so incredibly powerful to take that space, and as you're suggesting, to not get right on the conveyor belt, but to just really be with yourself first.
Well, I think, Jennah, first of all, I love just the phrase of morning pages.
Yeah.
It sounds like such a fresh start.
Yes.
morning pages, like, wow, I could write anything in here. And
Yeah.
the idea of like old fashioned handwriting instead of
Yeah.
typing
My hand
on our,
actually gets sore because I'm not used to it anymore. It's actually fascinating. I'm like, "Oh my gosh." Because you're just always typing and on the phone now.
my son and I are in this beautiful practice now, very intentionally. It was a conscious decision of us, between us, to write each other long-handed letters
Wow.
once a week. And there's so much that comes out in these letters, much like
Wow.
your morning pages, that you just feel more open to express
Yeah.
what is going on inside. And it is a stream of consciousness. You might be going from topic to topic, but it's just so very healing. And I think
Mm.
when we do that, we begin to, it's the same with my chasing slow practice. We begin to heal our hearts, we begin to heal our spirits, and that's when our lives begin to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I so agree. I feel like these such simple practices go such a long way. Even just being mindful, as you suggest, just being here now is such a big ask
Yes.
in this day and age. As you're saying, every 10 seconds we're getting a piece of mail. It's really hard to do it, but it's such a big payoff. To, particularly as you're suggesting, to chase that slow in the morning. I feel like it sets a particular type of energy for the rest of the day.
Oh, I think it does too.
Yeah.
And I can tell the difference if I shortchange that. Rarely do I, but when I do, I can tell the difference in me. I can tell how I'm showing up differently. Um, yeah, it just sets the tone for the whole day. And it allows me to know that it's okay to have more questions than answers. I don't
Mm,
have to have the answers.
yeah.
Although, as you said before, it's real. I loved it. Instead of constantly going to the thought leaders outside of myself, like, what do they think? What are they writing? What do I know? Like,
Right.
how can I tune within me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been a profound experience for me in reconnecting with that inner wisdom and inner knowing, and to be able to trust myself more, that most of these answers that I'm seeking are already within me, and that I need to have more sense of self-worth in my own experience of life to
Mm.
be able to help me in whatever it is that I'm exploring. It's been really beautiful.
Yeah, it sounds really beautiful. It reminds me of a couple of weeks ago, I was going through these few days that were really rough. A lot of grief was coming up for me. And as I moved through it, I was talking to a friend, and she said to me, she's such a dear friend, why didn't you call me?
Mm.
And I know now in my life when I need to call people, when I need to just sit with myself, and when calling somebody is going to undermine my own process. And what I said to her is, I just needed to sit with my own experience, and talking about it with anybody would have taken me out of that.
Yeah.
Right? And
Beautiful. Yeah.
sometimes we just have to do it by ourselves and figure out what it is that we're supposed to be learning about ourselves.
Yeah. So, in your book, Karen, 7 Strategies to Empower Your True Self and Inspire Others, I wanted to speak to you about the first strategy of
Mm,
connecting consciously.
mhm.
I think, this theme throughout this conversation has been centered around connection. And I think it would be beautiful for you to share more about what that practice looks like of being able to connect more consciously.
Mm. So when I wrote that chapter, and now as I think about it and as I live it, it's more a way of life.
Mm,
It's less about one thing we can do or 10 things we can do. And it's more about putting at the heart of my life the concept of connection.
Mm.
So how can I be intentionally connecting to myself? Like right here in this moment, Jennah, as I'm talking to you, like I'm just very aware that we are sharing this time in space in our lives. And I'm doing everything I can. I know you are too. I can feel it. It's just to be like right here. And your morning pages and my chasing slow helps us to be able to do that. It's intentional, it's purposeful. Um, so it really is a way of life. And I wrote something called my Connection Manifesto, which I have 12 pillars of what really works for me to remind me of why connection is so important. And I think there's spiritual practices, I think there's relationship practices, but it's all about putting connection at the center of our lives.
Mm.
This is why we are here.
Yeah.
To enhance other people's sense of connection, to enhance my own, to a spiritual, to the divine, to grace, whatever we call it. I call it God, other people call it other things. So it's more or less this way of life.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Something that helped me was to really put it to myself throughout the day. Am I living in a state of connection or am I in a state of disconnection? This almost goes back to earlier in the conversation when you brought up the vagus nerve and that polyvagal theory. It kind of keeps me really accountable because at any point that I'm obviously not in that state of connection, I'm not connected with someone and I'm in a self-protective experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, excuse me, something that's been really powerful for me is to be able to remain open to connection despite how people are around me. I think that's one of the biggest things in being really committed to showing up consciously in connection is to be able, I mean, you shared the example of being in a boardroom and someone says something that you don't agree with. Being able to still be there with them in all your presence and all your openness to connection, even if you don't agree with each other or you see difference in each other in that moment. I think that's been really big personally for me, is to be able, that's sort of my conscious work in it, is to be able to continue to pull myself back to that state of connection and to own the fear that someone may arise in me in that, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. I was having a conversation with an executive the other day, and it was so clear to me that they were focused on saying all the right words, but their emotion and their energy underneath their words didn't match what they were saying.
Yeah.
And it felt like a very unsafe conversation for me. And I could tune into that. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that not every interaction is going to be this healthy,
Right.
emotionally joyful interaction. It's their stuff, it's our stuff, it's a combination. But this conversation felt very unsafe to me. And the fact that I could say to myself, this feels unsafe to me, is an example of being connected to ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just that we can notice that, and then we can decide what we want to do with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karen, for this beautiful conversation.
Thank you, Jennah.
You just bring such a powerful, safe energy into this conversation, and it's something that I really appreciate.
I loved being here, and I loved chatting with you. Thank you, Jennah. Yeah.
So on a final note, Karen, I would love to ask you, what does it mean to you to be human?
I've been thinking about that question. It's such a big question.
What does
So
it
I'm
mean
just
to
gonna,
you today?
yeah, what does it mean today?
Yeah.
For me, it means allowing myself to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And during those periods of time, to give myself some grace. Yeah, I think that's what it means today in this moment.